and the applicable contract. And this is only for service contracts. We do not do service contracts, so you just leave this blank. If this request is actually coming from a subcontractor, you would identify the subcontractor in number 10. And then you have a description of the project. And basically, this is the description that you probably would see either in the contract negotiation record or in the contract. Here, this is one of my projects, and it's a renter production project, and we are paying for the infrastructure. And so you see that it's describing what those things are, and then saying what the leverage funding is going to be, which is the construction of the 52 rental units. And then you have the location of the project. You're listing next the wage decision, and then you're listing what additional classifications you need and what the contractor wishes the wage rate to be, and if there are any fringe benefits involved. So in this case, they're asking for a flagger and a pipe layer, and they're not going to be paying fringe. It's all going to be in cash. Next, please. Next. Okay, so there are a couple things you have to remember when you review this request before you send it to us. First of all, you have to verify that the request job classification isn't already listed on the wage decision. Sometimes it happens that they just don't see it, or they don't recognize that the wording is the same thing. They may call the position something slightly different. Next. The proposed classification has to be used on other projects in the area. So generally, when I look at these, I want to know that it's being used in throughout the county. Basically, they want to make sure that this is sort of a standard classification for the type of work being used. Next. You have to make sure you're not creating a new construction classification, but that you're adding an existing construction classification. So that means what they're trying to do is to have you avoid like creating a new job type of work, that it's something that is really specific only to this construction project. The only thing I can really think about that this would apply to is if you were doing something that involved new technology or something, and no one else is doing it yet. Next, please. So here's an example. A project requires that the windows be sealed, and the wage decision lists a glazier. So you're going to ask yourself, is this already listed? And the answer would be yes. Next. And that's because, next. Ceiling work is incidental to window rehab and installations, which is covered by the existing classification. So you would not be able to do this particular one because they don't want you to separate in minute detail every job. I hope that makes sense. If not, let us know. Next, please. So when you're reviewing the proposed wage rates, you have to keep in mind two things. The first one is, what are the state requirements for wage rates? And as of January 1, the Code of Virginia requires all workers to be paid at least $11 per hour, or the federal minimum wage, whichever is greater. So you're going to have to make sure that they're not asking for anything less than $11 per hour. And that applies to all existing CDBG construction contracts already underway, in addition to any new one. So I know that when the first week in January, I was sending out a reminder to all of my grant managers who had an existing construction contract that they needed to make sure that their contractors remembered that the wage decision, the minimum state rate had gone up, and that they were going to be starting to pay the higher wage rate if need be. And generally, this is only going to impact people in the labor classification, so a common laborer, a flagger, maybe a pipe layer. And I've given you the citation, so if you want to do some nighttime reading, you can look at the code yourself and understand what's going on. Next, please. Federal wage review requirements. So the feds, when you look at this from the federal point, they want to make sure that the proposed wage rate has a reasonable relationship to other similar existing wage rates, and that it's the same classification, the same category of classifications and sectors of industry. And whenever I have a question about whether or not it's in the same category, I always look at the SCA Director of Occupations on the DOL website. And that's a great source of information if you have to do a lot of Davis-Bacon work. So let's take what that means. So when they're talking about category of classifications, they're talking about the information that's in all caps. So in this example, it's power equipment operator and truck drivers. And then you have to look at whether or not your classification you want to add bears a reasonable relationship to other job classifications and the wage rates associated with them. Excuse me. So let's say you want to add under power equipment operator a roller. You would want to make sure that what's being proposed is similar to the other information under power equipment operator. You're not going to look at to see what a truck driver is being made because you're hoping that you can pay something less. You have to compare apples to apples. So that's what that means. Next, please. So what's next? What's going to happen? The general contractor should be instructed to use the proposed rate until we hear back from DOL. So they should just assume that it's going to be approved by DOL and pay that proposed rate or rates. Excuse me. Next. We will send the request to DOL. Next. And then they may approve the request as submitted, or they may modify. They call that conform your proposed rate. Next, please. So sometimes you get a mixed bag. Next, please. For example, this is a request that was made again by Luray. They were requesting a pipe layer, backhoe, etc. And DOL approved all of the proposed wage rates. Next. But DOL did not approve the proposed wage rate for the flagger. And that's because the amount that they were proposing for the flagger was less than the wage rate for a common laborer. And generally speaking, DOL does not approve any proposed wage rate that is less than a common laborer, because that's sort of as low as you get on the totem pole for all the different workers on your project site, because it doesn't really require any expertise to be a common laborer. So everything above that, they assume requires some kind of expertise, so it can't be lower. Next, please. Now, once you get that wage decision, and in this case, the flagger, they did not approve it, so they've been underpaying the flagger. So now you have to make wage restitution. And that will require the applicable payrolls to be resubmitted, showing the increase in the wage rate and proof that the restitution was paid. And you're going to want all this documentation in your files, because when there's a compliance review, we're going to look at that and verify that the workers involved were all paid properly. And We in turn have to provide that information to HUD. So you can see the section of the report that I send to HUD every 6 months. And in this case, 2 workers had to get wage restitution, and the straight time wage restitution collected was $65.99. And then if there's any overtime, you would also report that, but usually it just involves straight time. Next. And the last thing that has to happen is you need to make sure that the workers are notified about the change to the wage decision. And in this case, wherever all the posters have been posted, including the wage decision, next to the wage decision, you would post DOL's letter saying what has or has not been approved. Next, please. Okay, so could you go back, Sherry? Thank you. The only thing I want to add is that if you have a phase project, so every 2 years you're moving on to the next phase of the project, DOL attaches the approved request to a specific construction contract. So let's say in phase 1, you requested the flagger, who's going to get paid. Well, now he'd be getting paid at least $11. And you then move on to phase 2. Your contractor cannot assume that because the classification was approved for the previous phase, it's applicable to the second contract, because it's a different construction contract. And again, they attach it to the one you made the request for. It's not like they take your request and then add it to the wage decision, so it's only applicable to everyone with that wage decision. It's only applicable. So keep this in mind if you're doing a multi-phase project, and every 2 years you're getting a new construction grant with us, that you're going to have to do the process all over again. Next. Okay, so that really quickly is a look at how you go about submitting the request for additional classifications, including the new form. Again, we talked about this briefly yesterday. Kathy Boatwright and I will be doing federal labor training in May. So if you're required to do federal labor standards, you definitely want to attend this. We're asking that either in the chat or in the workbook or in the survey, that if there's anything you want to specifically see covered about federal labor standards, that you let us know so we can try to accommodate. And if you can't wait until May, when the PowerPoint is uploaded tonight, there's going to be a bunch of handouts, including the new form. So review those handouts. Again, federal labor standards is discussed in Chapter 8 of the Grant Management Manual. That should still be very accurate. Unfortunately, Davis-Bacon does not change a lot. There are previous webinars that we've done on federal labor standards that you can look at now. And I've given you the reference in the training archive where you can find those webinars. And then talk to your CDS. You should also feel free to reach out to me or to Kathy Boatwright, and we'll work with your CDS to get the information that you need. So at this time, I know that I've gone through this very quickly, but at this time, I'm going to ask you whether or not you have any questions that you would like to see answered. Now, I'm sorry, John, I can't give you a Tylenol. But anything else? Okay, Janet wants to know, are Davis-Bacon now wages required for a housing rehab project? Oh, thank you. I had meant to mention that. For housing rehab projects, it's not applicable if you're doing a single house in a construction contract. Davis-Bacon becomes applicable where with one construction contract, you're doing 8 or more units. And I can't remember a time when any of us have ever had a project where 8 housing rehabs were in a single construction contract. So thanks for asking that question, Janet. Again, if you're just doing one housing rehab in a construction contract, Davis-Bacon is not applicable, thank goodness. So John Bateman is going to say a walkthrough start to finish of the federal labor standards requirements. Yes, we can definitely do that, John. In the meantime, there is a handout you can get from your CDS that basically lists out all the steps involved in a construction project, including all the Davis-Bacon requirements. And you certainly can get that now from your CDS. I don't think I included that in the handouts. I will confer with Sherry after we're done today and see if I can still get that included in the handouts that are uploaded this evening. If not, contact me or your CDS and we can get it to you. Any other questions? Janet has given us Janet, can you tell me if I click on that, what I'm going to get? Oh, making Davis-Bacon work for you. Yeah, I think I've included that in a handout. Actually, usually when you get things from the federal government, they're not necessarily always the clearest, but they actually came up with several years ago with a handbook for contractors that explains Davis-Bacon, and it's actually well written and it's actually quite clear. And I would strongly encourage you, anytime you have a pre-construction conference that involves Davis-Bacon, that you make sure that your general contractor and all the subcontractors, their payroll clerks, the person who's going to deal with Davis-Bacon, gets a copy of this. Because it will answer most of their questions, and it should guarantee that your submissions will be much more complete and accurate. Okay, in that case, again, if you have any questions that come up later, please send them to me or include them in your workbook or in the survey. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, E.B. That was a great presentation, E.B. Thank you. And I would like to point out again that we're going to have much more deep dive by E.B. or Elizabeth Borger and Kathy in May. So for somebody looking for that full understanding of federal labor standards, that would be a great place to get into, or somebody who's not worked with it much.
Yeah, and if I just may say, Kathy and I are planning to start working on that, those presentations in February. So if you got things that you'd like us to consider, do send it to us. Now is not too early. Thank you.
And now we're going to transition to Kelly Cherapich doing environmental review record at warp speed. Kelly?
Awesome. Thank you, Stuart. As Stuart said before, I'm a community development specialist in the Abington field office, and I have the fun task of being the CDS that does the environmental review record processes. Next slide, please. And today we're going to be going over the environmental review record process at warp speed. And that is because, next slide, Cherry, next month on February 23rd and 24th, we're going to be doing an in-depth 2-day deep dive environmental review record training. So like EB and Stuart and Sherry have said, if you have any questions, if there's something I didn't cover today, if there's something you've always had a question about, either put it in the chat, send me an email, or put it in your survey at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. So to start off, I know that this might be a review, hopefully for some of you, but I do know that we have some new partners. And really at the most basic level, an environmental review is where a project is reviewed before any actions are undertaken, any funds are expended, or any dirt is turned. So we want to make sure that we don't upset the environment before we can't go back. And as you can see from this slide, pretty much anyone attending this workshop that has a grant with us will have to complete an environmental review. And that's not a Kelly rule. That's not a DHCD rule. That is not even a HUD rule. That is required under the National Environmental Protection Act of 1969. So any project that has federal funds has to complete an environmental review. And all CDBG and ARC and COVID projects, like I said, most of our grants are federally funded. Next slide. So now that we know what the environmental review is, the environmental review record is the documentation that is compiled from completing the environmental review process. It has several important functions, the environmental review record does, and that is to provide the public a way to judge environmental impacts before any dirt is turned and any money is spent. It helps to tell the story of the project, and it creates a clear paper trail of concise documentation if, you know, we don't want this to happen, but if there are issues that arise in the future, you have a document that shows that you did your due diligence. And on that note, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. So you make sure to document everything in your environmental review record, because, you know, things could happen. You want to make sure that you showed that you did your due diligence. Next slide, please. And the environmental review must contain everything on this slide. We can't go into too much detail today, but I do want to point out, make sure to pay attention to your project description, your statutory checklist, your public notices, and then any and all correspondence you have between regulatory agencies and your locality. Not only that, the environmental review must be available for public review. So your environmental review record needs to be at your town hall, your municipal building, your county administration building. It has to be available for public review. So if somebody from the street, I don't think anybody is going to walk in from the street and ask to read the environmental review record, but it could happen. You never know. It has to be accessible for public review, and it also has to be accessible in the way that it's written. Anybody should be able to just walk in off the street and read it. So you don't want to have unnecessary jargon. You don't want big words for big words' sake. You want to have it available for everybody to be able to read it and understand it. Next slide, please. So this is a basic flow chart for the steps of completing an environmental review. You start off defining the project and the scope. You determine your level of review. You conduct your review, and then you publish your notices and submit your request of release of funds and certifications, also known as the HUD Form 7015.15 if required. Next slide, please. So the first step and the most important step is to do, well, not the most important step, but the first step is to complete your project description. And your project description informs the entirety of your environmental review record. What you do with your project description helps determine your level of review and what you do from now on. It needs to be concise and thorough and must include all of the information on this slide. So we have project name, type of construction, specific location, types of activities, and time frame. We also want to know your funding. If you know your funding while you're completing your environmental review record, put it in there. I know a lot of times we don't, but if you do know it, please put it in there. And also, I'd like to touch on specific location. So I'm going to use my favorite example, the town of Possumville. If you are doing a water line replacement for the town of Possumville, but you're only going to be working in Duck Hollow, make sure you say the Duck Hollow section of the town of Possumville. Unless you're doing a completely town-wide water line replacement, you would not use the whole town as a location. So be very specific with your location. Next slide. The next step is to determine the level of review, and I'm going to apologize in advance. This slide has a lot of information I had to pack in. So if you look to the left, the arrow shows from the least intensive to the most intensive your level of review. So we start with exempt, which is the least intensive level of review, move to categorically excluded, not subject to the laws contained at 58.5, also known as a CENST project. You move down to categorically excluded subject to the laws at 58.5 CEST, environmental assessment, also known as an EA, broad level tiered review, and an environmental impact statement, which is the most intensive, and we'll talk about that. So let's start with the exempt and categorically excluded, not subject to projects. Both of these projects, types of projects, I'm going to lump together because neither one of them involve construction. They have been deemed to not harm the human or physical environment, both exempt and categorically excluded, not subject to projects. The big difference is the types of activities. So you would complete the environmental review record process the same for both of them. Just the activities are different. So example, for exempt projects, projects that strictly pay for administration, projects where we're just using funding to pay for tools and equipment, and public service projects that don't require any construction. Those are exempt projects. And most of our CDBG COVID funded projects are exempt. The next level, like I said, regroup it together because you complete the environmental review record process the same way, are categorically excluded, not subject to projects. And the activities that you would be doing for those would be economic development projects, short-term tenant-based rental assistance, home buying assistance, etc. Like I said, both of these levels of review are completed the same way and involve no construction. The main difference is just the type of project activities that are undertaken. The next, moving on to categorically excluded subject to projects. The easiest way to think about these is where construction involves only the replacement or renovation of existing facilities or structures. So for example, water line replacement is the easiest one to think about. The water line's already there. We're just taking out the old lines and putting new lines in there. We're not disturbing anything that is previously undisturbed. The next level of the environmental level of review is the environmental assessment. And as a good rule of thumb, if you turn dirt that hasn't been turned before, you will be doing an environmental assessment. A good majority of our projects are the environmental assessment level of review. And this involves new construction, significant expansion of existing projects, and even if the cultural environment will be disturbed. So if you're renovating a historic structure, a historic schoolhouse for adaptive reuse, for example, that would be an environmental assessment because you are changing the cultural environment of a project. The next level is a broad level tiered review, and this is a variation of the environmental assessment type of level of review. And this is mainly used for downtown facade projects in a historic district. So what you would do is divide your project into multiple phases, and it would roughly go as follows. You would consult DHR and sign a programmatic agreement for your first block of facades. You complete your statutory checklist and consult with your regulatory agencies as necessary. You would do a variation of the combined notices and then issue your request of release of funds and certification. And you would do that until you finished all of your facades. And now the last level of review is the environmental impact statement. This level of review rarely comes up for us. It's mainly for big projects like highways, big hospitals, airports, projects that we don't usually fund. However, if you happen to be excavating and you find the lost city of Atlantis or you find a woolly mammoth skull, that would be an environmental impact statement level of review because the cultural environment has been significantly disturbed. If your project requires an environmental impact statement, please contact your CDS and me as soon as possible because there's a lot more paperwork involved and we might not be able to fund the project. We might have to move the project. We might not be able to put it in the same place. So environmental impact statement, let me know. And I know this was a lot to cover in one slide, so bear with me. Next slide, please. So now that you've determined your level of review, you'll conduct your review. And to do that, you'll start with your statutory checklist, which we'll show on the next slides. For exempt and categorically excluded, not subject to projects, you'll use Appendix 2.BA, which is in our manual. For categorically excluded projects, subject to, you'll use Appendix 2.BB, which is also in the manual. And then you'll use Appendix 2A for all other types of projects. Next slide, please. So this is just what the statutory checklist looks like. If you've never seen it, I know you're saying, oh, I can't see that. So next slide, please. This is what I've zoomed in on it. And this is a bad example of a statutory checklist. We don't want to see any blank spaces. We don't want to see NA. As you can see, they said that airport hazards are not, they're not worried about airport hazards. I don't know why. You've not explained it. I don't know if you're near an airport. I have no idea. So a blank space and an NA is always a red flag for your environmental review record reviewer. Next slide, please. And here is a good example of in the statutory checklist. As you can see, the person said, I don't know if you can read it, this project is not near an airport. See Appendix 5 for map determinations showing this. All you have to put, you don't have to write a whole length novel in this box. I just need to know what documentation you have used to make your determination and where I can find it in the environmental review record. It's not hard. Next slide, please. So after you've done your statutory checklist, you'll start doing your research and consultation, which means that is when you will write your letters and emails to regulatory agencies as necessary. For example, if you had a project near a stream, and let's say it is a stream where salamanders live, and they're endangered salamanders, you would consult Department of Game and Inland Fishery or U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services as necessary. Your documentation has to be in your environmental review record, and it has to be on the governmental letterhead, so the county or the town letterhead. The PDC or the regional commission can prepare the letter, but it does need to be on governmental letterhead. And this is a question I get a lot. How long do you have to wait for a response? Well, if a regulatory agency has been deemed to be necessary to consulting with your project, you have to wait for a response as long as it takes. Now, I'm not saying, wait 5 years kind of thing, but you have to wait until you get something back from them to put that into your environmental review record. So give them a call, email them, let them know, but you do have to put that in your environmental review record. Next slide, please. So you finished your research. Now you have to determine your level of impact. And for full disclosure, I stole this way of remembering this from Michael Whitelock at HUD. I had a training a couple years ago to remember FONSI and FOSI. So hopefully you can remember this too. So there are 2 levels of determination. So the finding of no significant impact, also known as a FONSI, does not require federal action. That is the level of determination you want. So your project is not going to significantly impact the environment. The other level is a FOSI, which means finding of significant impact. And that means that your project will significantly affect the quality of human environment, and an environmental impact statement is required. So remember, we want to go, hey, like Fonzie. We don't want to go waka waka like Fozzie Bear. So remember that, and that's how I remember that. Next slide, please. So you've determined your level of review. You've hopefully got a FONSI. If you have a FOSI, contact us. And this is where we start publishing and posting our public notices. And if you look on pages 16 through 19 in Appendix 2 of our manual, you will see a calendar that will help you determine your postings and your publishing. So if you publish your request of release of funds and certifications, which is an Appendix 2G in our manual. By the way, if you are still using a paper copy of the manual, make sure you're using the current request of release of funds and certifications, which expires August 31st, 2023, also known as HUD Form 7015.15. If you're publishing your combined notice, you have to wait 15 days. If the day ends on a weekend or a holiday, you move it to the next day. If you post your combined notice, you have to put it at the locality's administration building. You have to put it in the project area, and you have to put it on the locality's website. And we'll also need a letter of attestation saying from the locality when it was published and how long it was posted, when it was posted and how long it was posted, and pictures of where it was posted at as well. You will have your time period. When your time period is up, if you had any comments, you need to address and resolve them. and then you'll send your combined, your request of release of funds and certification, and you'll send that to DHCD. And we have 15 days for the state objection period. If we don't have any problems with it, we'll go ahead and get your grant under contract. And remember, for exempt, sort of categorically excluded, not subject to projects, no publication is needed. Next slide, please. So some key points I want to make very quickly. I know that was a lot to go over. I hope you are not more confused than you are when you started. Designation of environmental review record signatory. So whoever signs the environmental review record has to be the chief elected official. So that is the chair of board of supervisors for the county and a mayor for a town. If the chief elected official doesn't have as much hands-on knowledge of the project and you would like to designate somebody else to sign it, for example, the county administrator or the town manager, you can do that. But we do have to have a designation formally adopted in a board or council meeting. And the completion of this document will be added to our contract negotiation record for all projects moving forward to be completed during the pre-contract phase. I know you are tired of doing more paperwork, but you can just adopt this when you're adopting the rest of your pre-contract documents. And we will have a boilerplate template coming soon. Elizabeth, I will get to your question in just a minute. Next slide, please. So another key point I want to make is to start early. Start early. An environmental review record can take months to complete. Ideally, you should be started before your application is complete. You can do everything other than publishing or posting your public notices prior to application. Also, if you believe your project might be a historic resource, contact DHR at the beginning of your environmental review record process. And you can use that link to see if your project has a historic resource. If you believe your project is in a floodplain or wetland, make sure to conduct the 8-step decision-making process, which is found in Appendix 2.H in the manual, and do all those related publications. That takes time. It can add an additional month to your project. So make sure to do that early. And also make sure you are consulting TDAT, which is Tribal Directory Assistance Tool, to see if any Native American tribes have a vested interest in your project. If your project involves excavation of any sort, you need to use that website and see what Native American tribes are in your area and contact them. If you contact them, you have to do your correspondence on governmental letterhead. So government to government, locality to the Native American tribe, because we want to government to government. So the PDC or the regional commission can prepare the letter, but put it on locality with letterhead. Next slide, please. Here are some resources that I have for you. As always, start with the Grant Management Manual, Appendix 2, and that is also on our website. If you're concerned, if your forms are out of date, email me, let me know, and I will make sure that we have the correct forms for you. But always start with your manual. The next resource, use the HUD Exchange website. You can literally look up whatever you need to, especially for the related acts on the HUD Exchange. The Tribal Directory Assessment Tool, which lets you know which Native American tribes are in your area that have a vested interest. This EPA tool, the NEPA Assist tool, helps you do the environmental review process. VCRIS, which is with Department of Historic Resources, helps you see if there's a historic resource in the project. IPAC also helps. Your CDS helps. And then I also help. Next slide, please. And here's my contact information. So if you have any information, any questions, shoot me an email, and you and your CDS and the HUD Exchange can figure it out.
Thank you, Kelly. That was great. We have a couple of questions. Looks like Elizabeth Barringer has a question.
You're muted, Elizabeth.
So I just wanted to go back for a minute to certifying someone as the person who can sign the environmental review record. Sometimes when I look at that, they're trying to get a PDC staff member or consultant to be the person. Basically, that person who's listed there, if there's ever a lawsuit brought against the grantee because they didn't follow something and, a group is trying to get the project to stop, in theory, the person whose name is there is the person who has to go to court and explain what they did and why they did it. And that don't want to see a PDC staff member or a consultant's name there. You don't want to be the one who in theory has to explain and justify it at a court case. You want that to be the grantee, and generally we want to see the chief administrative official's name there. Kelly, can you add anything to that?
Yes, actually the HUD regulations state it has to be the chief elected official. That has to be the person.
The chief elected or the chief administrative?
Elected, unless you designate somebody else. So you can designate somebody else, but if you don't have a designation form, it has to be the chief elected official. Thank you, EB, for bringing that up. Like EB said, God forbid if you have to go to court, but if you do have to go to court, whoever signed it is the one that's going to be in trial. So, but you can designate whoever you'd like to, like the town manager, I see that, or the county administrator. You can designate those people to sign it.
Yeah, and the person who is the designated official would be different than the person who prepares it. Generally speaking, the preparer is your grant manager. So that could be PDC staff, it could be a consultant, it could be somebody in the grantee's planning office or economic development office. So yes, Sarah, the preparer generally is somebody like you, a grant manager.
So we have a question from Mary Foley in the chat. On balance, in a proposed work plan, how many weeks should be scheduled for ERR? Assume one urban site.
Assume one urban site. Well, every environmental review is different. I don't know every single urban site in Virginia. Like there might be underground oil tanks. I would say safely 3 to 6 months to complete your environmental review. If you anticipate problems, if you're not anticipating problems, if it's going to be just no construction undertaken, you can do that in about, a week. So a couple days.
I'd like to add to that, please. Conducting the environmental review or beginning your environmental review is a planning grant activity if you have a planning grant. So it is well worth the time and energy to begin working on that during your planning grant. Some folks wait until they are actually funded with construction and they're working on it during that 120-day contract negotiation period. 120 days sounds like a lot of time. That's 4 months. But as Kelly just said, it can take longer than 4 months. If you're waiting for some of these consulting parties to get back to you so that you can run your ad, the ad alone takes 30 days. So, do plan on this taking 4 to 6 months and use your planning grant time wisely. Thank you.
Thank you for putting that out there, Joanne. Like, please start, even if you're just putting an application, go ahead and start your environmental review process. What do you have to lose kind of thing?
Kelly, this has been a great presentation. Thank you so much. It looks like we don't have any more questions, and we're going to hand this back over to Sherry.
Wait a minute, can I say something? There have been a couple of comments about making sure they're accurate forms on the website. I tend to be the point person to try to make sure that happens. And frequently, I don't know that a form has been updated until I get someone complaining that it's not been uploaded. So if you see that there's a form that needs to be updated, do feel comfortable sending your CDS or me directly an email letting me know that it needs to be updated, and we will make sure that happens. Okay.
Oh, and it looks like we had
we have a, oh, go ahead, Kelly.
Oh, I was about to say, it looks like we have a question from Sarah Rosmus. Does a floodplain notice always need to be posted in a newspaper? What is a good way to work around a paper that only circulates once a week? Depending on where you are posting or publishing your floodplain notice, we have circulation issues. a number of people that have to subscribe to the newspaper for it to be, you know, applicable. So I don't know where you're working at, but if you want to send me an email and let me know which weekly newspaper you have, we can check the circulation and see if that's a big enough circulation. Sanji Cooper asked, do tribes have to be contacted even if the project is not in a historic district? If you are excavating a project, so go to that TDAT website, and I'll put that in the chat as soon as I get off here. Go to that TDAT website. You can type in your address. It'll let you know if there are any Native American tribes that, you know, are in the area. If you are excavating, you have to contact them. If you're turning dirt, you got to contact them. If it's exempt or categorically excluded, not subject to, you don't. But if you're turning dirt, you got to let them know. Sarah Rosmus asked, are there updated worksheet forms? A lot of the links in the 2017 version are no longer active. There are, and I don't have permission to change the website. Like EB said, we have them. We can send them to you directly, but we have to work on getting the website changed, which takes a little bit of time. If you want to email me, Sarah Rosmus, for what forms you need, I can send those to you. Mary Foley, I can post the link for the tribes as well. And
I was just going to say, Kelly, that you and I have already talked about getting together next week and letting me know about all the forms that have to be uploaded. And then I will reach out to our webmaster people and get those uploaded. So give us some time, and by the end of next week, it should be taken care of. Thanks.
Awesome. And then Janet Jonas asked, where do you find the newspaper circulation data? That is on HUD. I don't know the number off the top of my head. It's in my book, my huge book. Don't know it off the top of my head, but I will get that information to you and I will post it in the chat. And I think that's, yes, Ellen, the invite for training in February we sent out too.
All right, everyone. Thank you all so much for that. We are going to take a quick break. We kind of went Fozzie on us instead of Fonzie, and so we're in the Waka Waka. We're running a little bit late this morning, but it's all great information, and I know you all had so much to say to Joe that, you know, we absolutely felt we needed to let it run over. So Melissa Mason will be up next. It is 11:03. Let's come back in 5 minutes, so 11:08, if we can do that. Thanks all.